Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
There's a woman who is in my network, wrote a book, and her name is Berta Medina. In the book, she talks about being at networking events. And I've talked about this from time to time, certainly on this podcast, certainly when I've been interviewed on other people's podcasts. But she talks about being at networking events. And when she goes to a networking event, it is her goal to get, if there's 5 people, she says, if there's 5 people there, it's my goal to get 5 business cards. Okay. If there's 100 people there, it's her goal to get 5 business cards. Meaning, if there's 100 people, I'm not going to try and meet the whole room. I just want to meet 5 people. In each case, I want to meet 5 people. And so to me, that says a couple of things. One, it says that, again, don't try and meet the whole room, just meet 5 people. But hidden within that, the other message is that you're going to have to carry a conversation with 5 people. I guess the advantage of trying to meet everybody in the room in a couple hours is you got to go, every minute you got to be off to the next person. And so you don't really have the opportunity to have a conversation with people. But if you're limiting yourself to 5 people, or maybe 4, or maybe 6, you're going to have a conversation with people. And that, you do the math, there's going to be time getting in and, over a couple hours, time getting in and getting acclimated, getting a cup of coffee, getting networked within the room. And then time just kind of, time moving between people, refilling your coffee, whatever it is. Maybe it's a beer. So you're going to be spending a little bit of time with those 5 people. Let's say it's 20 minutes. Let's say it's 15 minutes. You're going to be having to carry a conversation with those people. And so it's certainly important that it's certainly important that you learn how to carry a conversation. But it's also important to get out of a conversation. And what I find that people struggle getting into conversations. And once they're in a conversation, things tend to go well, and then they want to stay. This is fine. I want to stay here. I'm having a good conversation with somebody, but you can't do that, especially if you're going to try and talk with 4 other people following Berta's advice. And so you need to find ways to tactfully exit conversations. And I've always thought about this. When I get out and I talk to people, I get a lot of conversations about people don't like going to networking events. They don't like networking in general because of the conversation piece of it. Yeah, I just want to get down to brass tacks. This is what I need. What do you need? Okay, let's go. And that's fine, but trust doesn't develop that way. And we do business we refer people that we know, we like, and we trust. And so having the conversation is important, and making that conversation go well is important. And part of that is getting out of the conversation. So I've been thinking about this. I'm always thinking about things related to relationships and networking. And I stumbled across an article by a friend of mine, John Millen. He's a storytelling and communication coach. John and I met each other. It was several years ago. I don't want to say it was 10 years. Well, it had to be 10 years ago because he helped me with my first book, Foundational Networking. But he and I found ourselves both at a multi-level marketing meeting. We were both kind of getting recruited or pitched on it, and neither here nor there. But I remember people talking and John talking and saying, "Man, this guy just doesn't belong here." He must have really owed somebody a favor to be here. And maybe he thought the same thing about me because he reached out afterwards and said, "Hey, we should have a cup of coffee." And we kind of hit it off from there. And John has worked in Fortune 500 companies. He helps CEOs with their communication. John is, he's a great person to follow. I put in the notes I'll put in the show notes for the podcast, and I put in the notes with it for LinkedIn, links to John's work, because he has a lot of great things that he comes out with. It's johnmillen.com, MILLEN.com, John, JOHN. At any rate, um, he has a Sunday newsletter that he comes out with, Sunday Coffee, he calls it. It's a Sunday newsletter, and one of the topics that he came up with, or one that came out, which was fitting and really kind of pushed me over the edge to have a conversation about ending conversations. He had the 5 best ways to end a conversation. And in there, he shares a story about going camping, and he's a storyteller. He's really big into storytelling, and he has certainly encouraged me to tell more stories. But he tells a story of going camping with his family, and camping on some private land next to a vineyard, and the owner of the property would continually come by. It sounds, from what it sounds like, is the owner of the property is kind of a lonely guy, and anybody who's willing to listen to him is kind of fair game to hear all the stories. And John's just is a wonderful person. He's a nice person, and as he says in there, he's always anxious to hear people's stories. And I like to hear people's stories too. They're interesting. There's always something in there. Certainly, I like to share my stories, but I'm fascinated to learn about other people's stories and how they got from point A to point B. And at one point, John was sitting and listening to the person and said, "Well, thanks for sharing, the great stories." He was, going to get back up and, go rejoin his family. And the guy just launched into, as John says, he paused for a moment, took a drag on his cigarette, and then said, "It's been a long journey," and started sharing more history. He did more or less. The guy didn't read the room. He didn't take the hint. You know what? Great conversation. Time to move on. I need to go back to my family. And that was kind of the kicking off point for John to share all about how to end conversations. And again, he's a communication expert, works with CEOs, works with sales teams. But he gives 5, I don't want to call them the best, but there are certainly 5 good ways of thinking about ending conversations, or how to approach them. And again, being in a conversation is great. They can't last forever. They're ultimately going to, burn themselves out. The first tip he has, or the first suggestion, is what he calls the time conscious approach. I want to be respectful of your time. And I hear this a lot. Maybe that tells me I talk too long. But no, I hear this a lot in the Zoom world, because when people are scheduling on your calendar, they're generally scheduling for a certain period of time. And so you've kind of politely, passively implied that there's a limit. People will say, "Well, I know we only have 15 minutes," and they're conscious of it. Yeah. And sometimes I'll have more time, and I'll let people know, no, I don't have anything after this. We can continue. We don't have the time crunch. And sometimes, yeah, it's just a busy day. I've got to get moving on to the next conversation. But that's a way of indicating to somebody, "Hey, time's up. I want to be respectful of your time." And certainly can be certainly can be a useful approach. Getting ahead of myself here. The second thing John talks about is expressing gratitude. He calls it the grateful farewell. Expressing gratitude is a universally appreciated way to wrap up a conversation, and he demonstrated it when he was talking to his camping experience. "Thanks for sharing your experiences with me. Thanks for sharing the history. This is great. I've really enjoyed your perspective." That's kind of an indication. All right, it's time for me to move on. And it's just, it's a wonderful way to just indicate that things are done. And you want to kind of end the conversation. The third thing he talks about are nonverbal cues, and those I find are a little harder to pick up on Zoom. Um, you don't get to see people's hands, you don't get to see their feet, you don't get to see just a lot of other sorts of cues. Um, I can, when I'm on a Zoom call, I can see if somebody's checking the time, or they're, checking something. Certainly if you're in a meeting, or if you're in a networking event, or a meeting, you can see people looking around like, okay, I've got to be somewhere, and 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 those are, it's at point they can certainly be rude, but well, certainly early on in a conversation it can be rude, and you know I mean, I don't check my watch. I don't check my phone when I'm in a conversation with somebody, unless there's a reason I need to be checking my watch or checking my phone. In which case, I think it's best that you let the person know. Listen, I'm going to check my tone. If I get a text, I need to check it. I'm supposed to be meeting somebody here, and they said they would text me when they arrived. Or I'm expecting a text from my wife or kids or whatever related to this very unique situation, and I just need to be I need to be in tune to that. But with respect to ending conversations, there are certainly nonverbal cues. Putting somebody's business card away, for example, reaching out and shaking somebody's hand, is kind of an indication that, hey, it's over with. Patting them on the back, something like that, something that you would normally do at the end of a conversation, and it's something you can kind of work in. John talks about gradually slowing down your speech, um, maintaining eye contact, giving a warm smile. Um, those things can signal the natural end point of a conversation. Um, Fourth thing, end with a positive remark. In one of the last things he says in his article, I'm jumping ahead, but and this is important. This is vital to all these things. But this is a critical line. Remember, the way you conclude a conversation often lingers longer in memory than the content of the conversation itself. Again, how we end the conversation is more important, can have a more lasting impact than how we end the than what we were talking about to begin with, especially if it's a small talk conversation where it was just talking about the game or talking about the weather or the coffee at the event or something, funny in current events, or maybe something serious in current events. But the fourth thing he talks about is ending with a positive remark. That can leave a lasting impression. Um, I really enjoyed our conversation. Your insights are very helpful. Let's definitely continue this conversation over coffee sometime. And I think the last piece of that is important. Is in ending a conversation, you want to another thing you can do is summarize the things that you've committed to do, whatever that is. I will reach out to you. I will, balls in my court. I'm going to reach out to you, and we'll set up coffee, and we can talk longer. We'll have, we'll earmark more time. I'll be able to pull stuff together. In the meantime, I'm going to get you these documents or whatever it is. I'm going to send you that article I ran across, and I'm going to send you a link to a funny movie or whatever, the movie Airplane. Um, but that's something you can do to signal the end of the conversation. And the fifth thing he talks about is practicing empathy. Put yourself in the shoes of somebody else and to, you know, how the conversation ends. I've been in conversations where I don't want to say been offended, but it could be offensive for, I kind of chuckle when things, I chuckle when somebody's checking their watch or somebody's looking over their shoulder, okay, I'm not that interesting. You're looking for somebody else. That's fine. I think it says more about the person than it does me. But I could see where there would be people that would really bother them, would hurt their feelings. And um, I don't like to get my feelings hurt. Um, and nobody else does either. So you need to kind of think about what the other person's feeling. If you're, a couple thoughts I had with respect to just practicing empathy is letting people know, why you need to move on, especially if the conversation's gone shorter than normal. Some things I've said to people is like, listen, I need to connect with that person over there. I told them I would, I told them we would talk, here at this event, and I see them. I see they're available. I need to go. And there's a reason. Here's why I'm leaving. It's not a lie. It's, I'm not advocating lying. But if it's, you really need to go talk to somebody, then you go talk to them, but you let them know I've got to catch this person. They've been tied up all morning and I got to catch this person. Um, the other thing with respect to ending a conversation is simply to offer to do something for them. Who would you like to meet here? Following Berta Medina's, you know, I've talked to 3 great people. You're the third. I promised myself I would talk to 5. I need to meet 2 more people. Who would you like to meet? I know a lot of great people here. You're new. Is there somebody here you'd like to meet? I just had a great conversation with this person over here. Based on what you do, I think you two would really hit it off, or would have a very productive conversation. Can I make an introduction for you? Kind of another way of ending a conversation. The point in all of this is that you know having great conversations is a great skill to master. And part of having these great conversations is just knowing how to end them and not let them end awkwardly. I've been in conversations where it's just gone on too long, and I know it's gone on too long, and I know it's my fault for whatever reason. And you know, my bad. I just need to do better next time. Um, and I think that's just, for everybody, it's a skill you need to master, having these conversations, getting in conversations, whether in person, whether in Zoom, whether just before a meeting's going to start or whatever it is, and learning how to be good at these conversations, but then learning to move on in an artful and tactful way. That will help you build long-term relationships, both personally and professionally.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.